Vera Bühlmann, and in this clip I would like to speak briefly about the project, which is older than ATTP, but it very much informs the kind of quest we have, which relates theory to the question of identity, of an I or a we, or an it, a kind of an impersonal quantum citizen. This was the idea of this book here, A Quantum City, Mastering the Generic. It's a book which emerged from the chair of digital architectonics at ETH in Zurich, where I was working before coming to Vienna. This book was our way of engaging with the Future Cities Laboratory in Singapore, where a large part of the team in Zurich spent 1 year to engage with the question of the city today. The book has been edited by Ludger Hovestadt, myself, then Diana Alvarez-Marin, Miro Roman, and Sebastian Michael. It was a big adventure to ask the question of the city, and by choosing this subtitle, Mastering the Generic, we got into quite uncomfortable grounds, obviously. So let me say a few words how we mean this. The question of mastership, we felt, is starting to become an important one again. There are new ways of relating to authority, to acknowledgement, to authorship that we are all looking for in an adequate manner for the digital and the globalized world in which we live. Gertrude Stein gave a beautiful lecture, which was entitled, What are Masterpieces and Why Are There So Few of Them? This was 1936, and I took one citation in particular, which has inspired us a lot. It says, all this summer I meditated and wrote about this subject, and it finally came to be a discussion of the relation of human nature and the human mind and identity. The thing one gradually comes to find out is that one has no identity. That is, when one is in the act of doing anything. Identity is recognition. You know who you are because you and others remember anything about yourself, but essentially you are not that when you are doing anything. I am I because my little dog knows me, but creatively speaking, the little dog knowing that you are you and you're recognizing that he knows, this is what destroys creation. Let me relate this to a second citation, which is from Michel Serres this time, relating to what we were thinking of as a quantum ground. Michel Serres' citation goes like this. The masterwork, le chef d'œuvre, is unknown. Only the work is known and knowable. The master is the head, the capital, the reserves, the stock, the source, the beginning, the abundance, and is in the indeterminate interstices among the manifestations of the work. No one produces a work if he doesn't work in this continuous flow, whence sometimes comes a form. One must swim in language, dive in as if lost, for a weighty poem or argument to arise. The work is made of forms. The masterpiece is the unformed fount of forms. The work is made of time. The masterpiece is the source of time. The work is in tune. The masterwork shakes with noises. Relating these two issues together, the question of identity and recognition with form and even the origin of time, relates to us through what again Michel Serres has thematized in a book which was called The Natural Contract. It problematizes the relation of cities to history. Yeah? We are today not very easily praising cities, while we are very much euphoric and celebrating urbanization. There is a peculiar relation between the urban and the city, and this relation was at the core of what we were interested to investigate in this year. Here again, some excerpts from Michel Serres, because this gives us the fullest picture as quickly as possible right now. He writes, history remains blind to nature. All it knows is subjective wars, dialogical combat. In Goya's painting, Two fighting men do not realize that they are both being swallowed up by quicksand. The subjective wars and dialogical combat cannot know how to deal with the new form of violence all of humanity is beginning to experience in the phenomena that indicate climate change and the possible extinction of animal and plant species, a form of violence that must be called objective. Dialectical history has tried to invade the tribunal site where being is distributed, but the combating parties have thereby changed position so often over the course of time that the predicative theory of the ontological square has turned into a historical force itself. The two diagonals across which the dialectical positions run hence and forth and unceasingly exchange places have thereby picked up speed and erected the square to pivot around vertical axis. Battling over how, in the name of nature, things are to be defined and addressed has turned from an originally juridical site, where the distribution of proper rights of things according to their kindred, general or individual nature was at stake, into an emergent form of violence that appears to strike back against the imposed logical classifications and local orders that all compete in their aspiration to become referential and to expand from local onto global scales. Disturbed, dynamized, and furious, the earth responds to this historical force. It begins to tremble and threatens to swallow up the combatants together with all those who watch the spectacle and place their bets on one of the parties. Humanity has become a physical variable, and it is high time to begin thinking in these terms. Of course, this relates to the Anthropocene, and the Anthropocene is the background for us asking the question, who would that be, a quantum citizen? The answer we came up with, the preliminary one, is that it's a we, and the we, all of whom to belong to it are migrants, native, but native to the universe, not to the earth or a particular territory. So we are interested here, with the question of the city, to ask about the realism, the reality of intellectual achievements, of intellectual projects, of intellectual hubris as well. We called this we Orlando. Orlando, figment of the imagination, ideal and idle, and fallible in every way conceivable, but flawless in the eye of the beholder, is given to the world perfectly formed by the gods, themselves constructs of the human endeavor to conquer the unknowable and unknown. Timeless, ageless, and deriving immense powers mostly from an indomitable spirit, paired with an inquiring mind, Orlando is all human, all humanity, all humility, and all pride, an articulation of the embodied consciousness we may call the experience of being alive. Not good or bad, nor beyond the pale is Orlando. Orlando is wonder and discovery and surprise, and strive for self and self-knowledge, and hunger for connections that mean something, and need for identity, desire for the loss of self, and urge for survival, and yearning for the tender release that is death, and fear of the violent crash into the absence of life that is dying. And aching for a place in history and undoing that history bit by bit, and invention, creation, as much as destruction and cruelty and kindness, and the duality of all things polar and their fusion, and the idea of being itself. Never even mind religion and statehood and status and tribe and the blood ties that bind and sin and redemption or even forgiveness. Orlando is all made up, which is why Orlando is real. And Orlando, of course, is ancient as much as Orlando is new. Orlando is judged by the gods, subject as they are to their own whims and fancies, and with wisdom endowed, no more and no less than we can conceive, to embark on a quest to the city. And so as we go to the city, our protagonist shall be Orlando. Sebastian Michael, a writer, and also a teacher here at ATTP, wrote for every one of the chapters introductions where Orlando travels to cities, and they are travels through time, so the formats in which these texts are written try to imitate, to be empathic with the customs of the respective historical times that we are talking about. The book is organized into 4 chapters. Welcome to a city. We are the world, parade of masterpieces and manner. There is no claim at all to be exhaustive. This is not a description of a quantum city. This is an articulation of it, which is very much inspired, of course, by our own limits, limited, biased backgrounds, and biographical origins. So what did we do? What we did in the first chapter, Welcome to a City, is to look at texts that people have written that are still existing, a corpus of travel documents of people who were thinking about what it is that they do when they travel. The whole book is composed as a kind of an anthology. There is, apart from Sebastian Michael's texts, The Travels of Orlando, not a single text written by us. It's an anthology where we combine images, titles, labels, subtitles, categories as well, as we call them, and excerpts from a large corpus of texts that we found fascinating. For example, we have, as testimonies of famous travelers, we have Herodotus, we have Petrarch, we have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. But we were also asking in this chapter, Welcome to the City, questions like, why is one entering a city? For this we were scanning and searching blogs, and this we are talking of the year 2011 and 12, if I'm not mistaken, or 12-13, but I think it was 11-12. So the social media sphere, how do people, but now that everybody is traveling, how do they write about their experience? How do they try to invite other people to join them? How do they make recommendations? We found beautiful things. Of course, it's about learning, it's about reading, but it's about meeting people. We have excerpts from blogs, which we all contextualize in their larger contexts in between parts of the book. Yeah, so the sources are, yes, taken out of context, but they're also planted back into at least a larger part of their original context in another part of the book. What we find is that people travel for medicine, for meeting, for learning, for being with people. We experience how they present themselves. They are euphoric about things that they find. They write poems about experiences that they have. They take selfies. They are amazed. They find things. They are discoverers. They are also tired. They are cherishing all sorts of experiences. This is how we contextualize the excerpts that you see in the picture parts. So this is Welcome to a City. The second chapter, We Are the World, is made up in a similar way, but here we ask questions now. How do we speak so casually of the world today? On what basis is this happening? Statistics is important. The global connection, of course, of resources is important. Mappings, cartographies that work on a quantum level, really, on a probabilistic level, not only statistic depictions, but also probabilistic modelings. We speak about the whole of the populations. It was at that point largely 7 billion people living on the world. We speak of the world climate. We don't speak of local weathers primarily anymore. We speak of its impacts. Yeah, we try to kind of make cartographies, archaeological cartographies of cities that basically grow through time, that originate in what we could almost say the element of history. We have a counter-emphasis made popular, of course, by Rem Koolhaas with this idea of the generic city. We have forms of representing this global perspective or point of view through diagrams. We have an agency which is not really attributable to anyone in particular. No, everybody who bases their ideas on sensing, on sensor, on artificial sensor technologies, can do simulations, famous simulations like computing the limits of growth on the planet in ever new editions and ever new numbers, as we know from the Club of Rome's example. But there's also a keen sense and many, many forms in how people are starting to be part of this, so to make themselves very concretely and individually relevant for these abstractions which are underway. We have a lot of posts that we found in the social media where it's all about being part of it, where it's about expressing that one is upset with things and so on. In the third part of the book, which we entitled Parade of Masterpieces, our interest really was to consider quite drastically that cultural artifacts are artifacts that people at one point invented. They came up with that. They changed the ways of life. One of the most important one, evidently, is when law started to be written in stone. Now, this had a very precise reference with the Code of Hammurabi. The institution of law, how it emerged, was particularly interesting here, of course, because this question of identity and an abstract kind of recognition and of contribution manifests quite evidently in law, where everybody should be addressed equally. We have mythical stories around that. We have first constitutional texts, so political texts about the constitutions of cities. How did people think of the city as an artifact like that, as something that can be made? We have mythical stories that try to minimize or to bring closer, let's say, the dimensions of the transcendent and the gods and knowledge and science and mathematics. We have different forms of political documents throughout time. We have literature engaging with the changes introduced thereby. We have, again, political documents dating of more recent time in this case, with the United States Declaration of Independence, or a philosophical oeuvre really, like the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant. We have inventions in poetry, in mathematics, in literature, in economy, in philosophy, and so on. Parade of Masterpieces takes up the custom, of course, of a carnival to a certain extent, so it's about the celebration of these things, but in a, let's say, mixed form between adoration and spectacle. Yeah. So carnival, comedy format. We tried to find a distance to the prevalent sense of relating to politics and history through tragedy mainly. In the last part of the book, which we entitled Manner, we were looking through more recent artifacts, not only more recent ones, but also recent ones, in the search of mythical personas. How are they present in our brands? How are they present in movies, in stories that we tell? How do they reappear? Again, we were looking through the social media. Again, we were finding contemporary articulations of these things. We were interested in how people relate to this background without trying to discuss it on a meta level, really. We wanted to compose an anthology. What we find is beautiful projects like David Bowie and his Space Odyssey, or encounters between the Harley-Davidson people and the Pope. What we find is various forms of impersonations that where figures, characters impersonate what in earlier times would have been called virtues or vices or temperaments, tempered beings that are kind of generic, but there are many of them. We look at The Great Gatsby. We look at music, of course, at movies. science fiction as well, commercials, famous figures in them. We have a coda regarding Orlando again. This coda I would like to play to you now in a reading given by Sebastian Michael, who is the author of these beautiful stories. The figure of Orlando, of course, has been, if you want, abducted from Virginia Woolf's beautiful book. But this is just a side note.